The day I came home with a small gift bag and an old craving for my armchair, I found my life tipped onto the lawn. Clothes in a bright, humiliating scatter. My journals with their spines torn. The wool blanket my hands had taught to be patient in winter. On the door, a note slapped with silver tape, flipped in the breeze like a flag for cowards. Sorry, Mom. No space. My in-laws are moving in. My daughter-in-law leaned on the doorframe, lips curled, and said not to stand there because the neighbors were watching. My son kept his eyes on the step as if shame were a pattern in the concrete. I did not argue. I opened my phone and filmed everything. If they insisted on erasing me, they would learn how permanent evidence can be. My name is Dorothy Kane, 69, nurse by training and widow of more than 20 years, mother to Nathan and resident of Charleston, South Carolina, where the river learns every evening to turn gold. I believed aging would be softer than this, birds on the fence at 700 a.m., grandkids sticky with jam at 6:30 p.m. laughter that didn't need an apology. But the morning I found my wedding photo frame on the grass and a rain-stained apology on the door, I learned how fast a life can flip. Mrs. Patel from across the street eased her curtain and then hurried over, eyes bright with outrage. Dorothy, did they do this? I nodded and asked her to photograph the clock, the date, the mess, and the note. She became my first witness. Through the window, I saw Brianna, my daughter-in-law, directing two men with a voice sharp as a clothes hanger. I chose stillness. Years of nursing had taught me that panic wastes oxygen. I opened the asset app my lawyer set up when Tom died and confirmed what mattered: the deed and the taxes and the insurance all in my name. I downloaded copies and locked them like a heart behind a ribcage. Brianna came to the porch with a tone that tried to pass for kindness and offered rent as if dignity were a bill she could cover. No need, I said. This house is mine. I did not raise my voice. I rolled my suitcase to the curb and called a driver to help lift what had survived the lawn. When Mrs. Patel asked where I would go, I told her the truth I had kept even from my son 3 years earlier, when Brianna's smile began to feel like a curtain hiding something. I bought a small apartment downtown. I called it an investment. It was really an exit. The apartment waited with dust quiet and light like honey at late afternoon. I set Tom's photo on the shelf and put the note from the door in a folder labeled Case 1. Then I made tea and wrote the first line I had written for myself in years day one, starting over, not from zero, but from self-respect. I opened a new file on my laptop and named it Operation Freedom. Evidence, witnesses, statements, lawyer, agent, utilities. Every step in black and white, because kindness without paperwork is an invitation to be robbed. My sister Marisol called and offered thunder. I told her I preferred weather you can see through. After we hung up, Mrs. Patel texted photos from her window. A moving truck, Brianna's parents carrying boxes as if they had paid for the roof above their heads, and a caption that stung but did not surprise me. They moved their things in the day you left. I saved everything into a folder called Evidence 1 Property Occupation, then shut the laptop and let the evening paint the river. I was not crying. The body knows when tears help and when they only fog the path. That night, at 10:00 p.m., I wrote 3 words that steadied my hand. Do not back down. In the morning, I acted like a hospital shift leader, reclaiming a broken ward. I restored the utilities, updated every password, and asked the bank to remove an old authorization with Nathan's name that I should have ended years ago. The clerk said I was unusually organized for my age. I wanted to tell her organization is what dignity looks like on paper, but I just thanked her and kept moving. By noon, I had an appointment with attorney Avery Grant, a man with the voice of good oak, the same lawyer who had once helped Tom. He read my file, nodded once, and drafted a 30-day notice to vacate under the South Carolina Code. We will serve it today, he said. Let the law do the talking while you keep your calm. I signed with a hand that did not tremble. Before dinner, my old colleague Sandra answered a message from Marisol and put me in touch with a real estate agent named Ryan Cole. Young, clear-eyed, and steady in the way good bridges are steady, he proposed meeting at 9:00 a.m. to assess the property. I agreed and slept well for the first time in months. At 8:20 a.m. the next morning, Nathan knocked on my apartment door with the knock of a boy who expects to be forgiven before he apologizes. I let him in, poured coffee, and asked only one question. Who gave permission for Brianna's parents to stay? He tried to hand me cash. I slid it back. I am not broke, Nathan. I am just done. He blinked at the deed with my name printed in letters big enough not to be ignored and learned a lesson older than either of us. Sometimes silence is a signature. At 9:00 a.m., I drove back to Magnolia Street, the place where my first life had bloomed and then been pruned to a stump. Ryan met me at the gate with a firm handshake and a simple question. You are the owner? I turned the key, felt the lock give, and stepped into a house that smelled like strangers. The door closed behind us with a sound that told me the next chapter had begun. The perfume of someone else's life met us in the foyer. Grease on the sofa, a cigarette tin, on the mantel curtains, the color of wilted lemons. My books were gone from the shelves. A photo of Brianna and Nathan had replaced the family portrait where Tom's smile used to keep the room warm. Ryan moved with professional quiet, measuring walls, snapping photos, noting scratches on the hardwood. From the primary bedroom, Brianna's parents shuffled out in yesterday's clothes, blinking like owls at noon. The father cleared his throat and tried for charm. "Mrs. Kane, we thought you had moved." The mother added that everything was temporary. I let the word sit between us like a dropped spoon. "Temporary still requires permission," I said, "and the permission was never mine to give away." Ryan looked at me, then at them, and continued his work. We walked the rooms like a doctor on rounds. In the kitchen, my china mugs had been replaced with cloudy glass. The pantry held food I did not buy. A drawer that had once kept little Lily's art supplies now held screwdrivers and a bundle of keys that were not mine. Ryan paused at the window and tapped his notes. "This block is gaining value quickly," he said, near the new corridor and the expanded high school. "With a light refresh, you could list higher than 3 years ago." I nodded and wrote it down. In the north corner of the living room, there was a small, pale patch on the wall where the cat tree had stood. Daisy was gone. A slice of grief lifted and settled again. Ryan asked if he should document the condition of the rooms. Every detail I answered, even the smell. Brianna's mother trailed us, trying to fold the mess into words. "Mrs. Kane, surely we can find an arrangement. We can pay something each month." I stopped and turned to her with a face that felt like still water. "I am not negotiating my dignity. A lawful notice has been served. All communication will go through my attorney." I placed Avery Grant's card on the dining table where my old Blue Runner once lay. She picked it up as if it might burn. At 3:40 p.m. that afternoon, Avery's assistant texted me a confirmation. "Legal notice delivered, signed acknowledgement obtained. Deadline to vacate 30 days from today." I read it twice and felt the relief that comes when a bone's set straight. By 4:15 p.m., I had forwarded the confirmation to Ryan and filed it in the digital dossier with the date and minute. Evidence turns a story into a spine. They came to my apartment at 8:10 p.m. that night. The knock was too loud for neighbors and too soft for police. Nathan stood behind Brianna, face-tired collar wilted. She spoke first with tears that appeared on cue. "We were wrong, Mom. Come back home, and we will take the small room. We will pay rent. We will do whatever you say." I listened the way you listen to a radio with a station that will not tune. When she finished, I reached for my phone, opened the recorder, and placed it on the table. "For accuracy," I said. She stared at the red light and went quiet. Nathan tried next. I was trying to keep the peace. I did not think it would go this far. I set a copy of the deed beside his coffee and waited. He lowered his eyes, then nodded. "Sometimes the sun grows up only when the facts do not blink." On the third day, I attended a senior circle at St. Helena Church. A dozen chairs in a soft-lit room, a tin of butter cookies, a kettle of tea. A white-haired woman spoke about a daughter who drained her savings, and a counselor who said she should be grateful for companionship. A man confessed that his son sold his truck without asking and left him stranded for doctor appointments. The room tightened around 2 words that gave us a name for something we had lived without naming for years. Emotional elder abuse. The group leader spoke calmly about boundaries and record-keeping, and the way law prefers paper to tears. When we held hands to close, my palms shook not with grief, but with recognition. I was not alone, and I was not done. The following morning, at 9 a.m., I met Ryan at the house for the formal assessment. Brianna's parents were waiting in the hallway, stiff with worry. The father tried one more attempt at politeness. "We can be out in 6 weeks," I answered without anger. "You have 30 days. I have always kept my word. I expect you to keep yours." Ryan finished his measurements calculated in his notebook and looked up. "My estimate is between 680,000 and 720,000 if we list within a week. Your timing is good. Inventory is tight." He spoke the way a good surgeon delivers a plan. No drama. Only steps. At 2:30 p.m., Avery welcomed me into his office of red brick and legal quiet. He reviewed the assessment, drafted a schedule for notices to utilities, and advised that all contact with occupants remain written. "If they damage property or attempt to change locks, document and notify me," he said. "Do not engage. The law does not need raised voices. It needs clean facts." I left with a folder and a calm that felt like armor that fits. Days found a rhythm. Morning coffee at 7:10 a.m. and a walk along King Street. Calls to the power company, the water department, the internet provider. Each account returned to my control with a timestamp and a confirmation email that I placed into the dossier. In the afternoon, I visited the community center and learned how to set up a security camera and avoid phishing emails. In the evening, I read for an hour and wrote in my journal. Respect does not come from pity. It comes from clear boundaries. The sentence became a small candle I relit nightly. On the 8th day, Nathan returned alone at 10:00 a.m., the worry lines deeper. If I ask my in-laws to leave, will you come home, Mom? The question was a mirror he needed to face. For me or for the house I asked? He could not answer. I poured coffee and spoke gently. I am not returning to the old arrangement. I will not live where my presence is a favor. I will rebuild with respect, not with fear of making others uncomfortable. Bring the children on weekends. Let them see that adults can disagree without cruelty. He swallowed hard and nodded. Growth is rarely loud. At 9:05 a.m., on the 30th day, a moving truck rattled up Magnolia. There were no apologies. Only boxes and the sound of tape and the heavy air of people who have delayed an inevitable end. I stood at the curb with my file in hand and watched them go. When the truck door slammed, Ryan planted a fresh sign on the lawn. For sale? The sound of the metal entering the soil made a clean period at the end of a long sentence. I turned the key, locked the door, and placed the keys in Ryan's palm. Your turn now, I said. He nodded once. You will have an offer quickly. 2 days later, Ryan was right. At 11:45 a.m., my phone buzzed with his calm voice, full of quiet excitement. Dorothy, we have a cash offer for $720,000. Exactly what I predicted. I stood by the window, the Charleston sky bright as forgiveness, and felt a strange stillness settle. Not joy, not vengeance, just release. At 3:07 p.m., I sat across from Avery as he reviewed the contract line by line, his pen steady and unhurried. When he struck through a clause meant to delay payment, I realized how many years I had trusted words without checking their fine print. He handed me the revised papers, and I signed. My name looked stronger than it had in decades. Avery smiled and said, You didn't lose a home, Dorothy. You reclaimed your worth. When the sale closed and the wire cleared, I took 3 quiet days to breathe. I paid every small debt, every hospital bill, every whisper of financial worry that had shadowed me since Tom's death. Then I divided what remained into careful folds, a modest investment, an emergency fund, and a travel account labeled for joy. For the first time in years, my finances felt not like survival, but like freedom that had done its math. The following week, I drove to Tybee Island, the same place Tom and I once promised to visit and never did. The wind lifted my hair, and the salt touched my skin, like memory washing itself clean. I walked barefoot along the waterline, each wave dissolving another piece of bitterness. I stayed 3 nights. No phone, no chatter, just a window, a notebook, and the ocean humming like forgiveness. One evening, I wrote in my journal, I didn't lose a house. I traded it for peace. When I returned to Charleston, the apartment looked softer somehow. I bought new curtains, pale cream with light stripes, and hung sunflower prints along the hallway. I added snake plants in the corners and a reading chair by the window where morning light fell like gold. I brewed jasmine tea and opened my laptop. A thought came, maybe others like me needed to hear that it's not too late to start again. So I created a small social page, not to boast, but to share. My first post was a photo of tea beside a book, and the caption, Older age isn't the end, it's the chapter we finally write ourselves. To my surprise, comments arrived like small lanterns. I thought I was the only one lonely. I'm learning to live again. Thank you for reminding me. Each message was a voice finding its echo. Ryan even messaged saying, You're inspiring more people than you realize. I replied, I'm just living in the light I once turned off. Months passed. I joined a volunteer group through my church to help seniors facing neglect and financial manipulation. The first woman I visited was Lucille, 82, trembling and alone after her daughter drained her savings. When she whispered, You know you're only really old when no one listens to you, I held her hand and said, Then I'll listen, and we'll be loud together. The warmth in her eyes that day was worth more than any signature I'd written. One morning, almost a year later, Nathan appeared at my door with Ethan and Lily. They stood shyly, like a memory asking to be let back in. Hi, Grandma, Lily said, her voice small but bright. I bent to hug them. This time, my love wasn't desperate. It was calm, balanced with roots. Nathan glanced around my apartment and said, It's beautiful, Mom. It suits you. I smiled. Wherever you feel at peace, that's home. The children laughed, found the cookie tray, and I watched them with a warmth that didn't hurt. When Lily dropped crumbs, I simply handed her a cloth. A clean home makes everyone happy, I said. She giggled and helped. Nathan sat quietly, eyes softer than I remembered. You've changed, he murmured. Different or truer, I asked. He thought for a long time. Both. That summer, I hosted a small birthday tea. Mabel from the seniors group brought cinnamon buns. Mrs. Patel drove from the old neighborhood with a bouquet of wildflowers. Even Nathan came leaning in the doorway, proud and quiet. On the cake, written in careful icing, were the words, To life and new chapters. When the candles went out, applause filled the room. I saw in Nathan's eyes, not guilt, but recognition. He was finally seeing his mother, not as someone waiting to be forgiven, but as a woman who had written her own ending. After everyone left, Nathan helped me clear the dishes. The balcony lights shimmered over the river. He said softly, "I thought love meant protecting people, fixing everything. Now I realize love sometimes means stepping back." I touched his hand and answered, "And I learned love isn't endurance. It's standing tall beside someone, not bowing to keep the peace." He nodded, tears quiet but clean. For the first time in years, I felt like we were two adults meeting honestly in the middle. 2 years have passed since that morning when I stood outside my own locked door. I'm 71 now, still healthy, still working with Silver Voices, the small fund I started to help seniors reclaim their rights. We've assisted dozens finding lawyers housing even just a listener. Each time someone says, "You reminded me, I still have a voice. I know the pain had purpose." Last week I walked past my old street. The house had new paint and new owners a plaque that read The Harpers. I didn't feel loss, only quiet gratitude. I whispered to the wind, "Thank you for teaching me to leave at the right time." That evening, I posted one last message on Silver Voices. Sometimes the strongest act of love is leaving in silence, not to prove anyone wrong, but to protect your worth. If you're standing at the start of that road, know you're not alone. The comments came from everywhere, Florida, Texas, Maine. People who had felt invisible now speaking up. I read each one, tears warm but peaceful. Maybe that's what healing really is, not forgetting the pain, but turning it into a light others can follow. If this story touched your heart, tell me where you're listening from. Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so stories like this can keep reaching others who need them. Remember, peace begins the moment you believe you still deserve happiness.